Oyagala okumanya ebiriwo, ebyaliwo, oba ebigenda okubaawo. Program Tambula n'okumanya eggose. Tambula n'okumanya ku MRU TV ne Royal FM. Tambula n'okumanya. Tambula n'okumanya.
Ujaama system in Tanzania. In 1967, President Nyerere published this development blueprint, which was titled the Arusha Declaration, in which Nyerere pointed out the need for African model of development and formed the basis of Ujaama as a policy. The Swahili word Ujaama means extended family or brotherhood. It asserts that a person becomes a person through the people or community. The spirit of others or community bring units of family together and fostering cohesion, love, and service. Nyerere used as a basis for a national development project. He translated the Ujaama concept into a political economic management model through several means. Creation of one-party system under the leadership of the TANU, alleging the need to solidify the cohesion of a newly independent Tanzania. The institutionalization of socio-economic and political equality from the creation of central democracy, the abolition of discrimination based on ascribed status, the institutionalization of social, economic, and political equality through the creation of central democracy, the abolition of discrimination based on ascribed status, the vigilization of production, which essentially qualificated of all forms of local productive capacity, the fostering of Tanzania through two dimensions, the transformation of economic and cultural attitudes. Economically, everyone would work for both the group and for himself. Tanzania must learn to free themselves from dependence of Europe. The implementation of free and compulsory education for all Tanzanians in order to sensitize them to the principle of Ujaama. The creation of Tanzania rather than tribal identity through means such as the use of Swahili. Julius Nyerere, leadership of Tanzania, commanded international and attracted worldwide respect for his constant emphasis upon ethical principle of the basis of practical policies in Tanzania. And Nyerere made a great strides in vital areas of social development. Infant mortality was reduced from 133 per thousand lives birth in 1965, 110 in 1985. Life expectancy at birth rose from 37 in 1960 to 52. In 1984, primary schools enrollment was raised from 25% age group only 16% of 25% of age group, only 16% of females in 1960 to 72%, 85% of females in 1985, despite the rapidly increased population. The adult literacy rate rose from 17% in 1960 to 63% by 1975, much higher than in other African countries, and contributed to rise. However, Ujaama increased production, casting doubt on the project's ability to offer economic growth. Nyerere used a colonial law, the Preventive Detention Act, to crush opposition in 1967. Nationalism transformed the government into the largest employer in the country. Purchasing power declined, and according to World Bank researchers, high taxes and bureaucracy created an environment where businessmen resorted to evasion, bribery, and corruption. In 1973, a policy of forced vigilization was pursued under Operation Vijiji in order to promote collective farming. The political infrastructure, independent Tanzania. After the 1961 Independent Declaration was a critical response to colonialist values. The British had held Tanzania as a colonial state due to the border divisions in East Africa. In World War I, the state was formed under British colonialism as Tanganyika Territory. In 1960, many of the native representative leadership unions were beginning to become responsible for administrative obligation on a colony. These unions were established in smaller local villages to provide limited representation during the colonialist regime. These localized forms of governmental power improved the attendance monthly meeting increased to 75% during this time. This increase in village participation in government infrastructure occurred simultaneously with the collapse of authoritarian rule of the British. However, There remained a rigid divide between agents of power and peasantry. The mistrust of the farming population was well justified, as pre-agriculture projects had led to exploitative acts of crop yielders. The Tanganyika Agricultural Cooperation Schemes (TACA) served as a project to transform the pre-industrialized farmer into a systematically efficient crop yielder who participated in the large national economy. This program was highly paternalistic and rejected by the Tanzania peasantry upon the independence from British rule on December 9, 1961. The sovereign state of Tanzania was created and was in need of new political order. During the collapse of British colonial rule, the TANU was a party that was led by Julius Nyerere and constituted mostly of a peasantry population. TANU was able to create a village organized political structure which allowed localization in political representation. This allowed TANU to grow in support from 100,000 to 1 million people within only 5 years. Nyerere introduced the Arusha Declaration, and it was created to codify the projection and ideologies of Ujaama. The documents allowed TANU to create a national consensus for the ideologies of a socialist party, which involved around the ideologies to brotherhood and community. The Arusha Declaration served as the TANU constitution and clearly states the infrastructure of a socialist state. It outlined a progressive state that supports right to the individual, free from authoritarian regime. The opening statement begins, whereas TANU believes that all human beings are equal, every individual has a right to dignity and respect, that every citizen is an integral part of the nation and has a right to take an equal part in government and local, regional, national level, that every citizen has a right of freedom of expression, of movement, religious belief, and association with the context of law, that every individual has a right to receive from society protection of his life and property according to the law, that every citizen has a right to receive a just return for his labor, that all citizens together possess all the natural resources of the country trust for their descendants, that in order to ensure economic justice, the state must have effective control over the principal means of products, and that is the responsibility of the state to intervene actively in economic life of the national so as to ensure the well-being of citizens and so as to prevent the exploitation of the person by another or one group by another, and so as to prevent the accumulation of wealth to an extent which is inconsistent with a classless society. Ideology of self-reliancy and 5-year plan, TAN believed that the nature of capitalist market was exploitative and was contrarious to the eradication of poverty for Nyerere. It was crucial that Tanzania created a self-reliant economy that could defend itself from exploitative capitalist international markets. The Ujaama ideology was deeply rooted in the image of self-reliant relation, which justified a massive governmental spending used to enhance production. Ujaama villages and Tanzania visualization. Ujaama ideology as presented in the Arusha Declaration, promoted by TANU and promoted by President Nyerere, had significant effects on the structural development of the first 5-year plan. The beginning of the Ujaama development scheme began in the village of Litoa. The Ujaama policy had several issues that made it to the decline. Eventually, number of factors contributed to the downfall of the development model based on the Ujaama concept. Among these factors were the oil crisis of the 1970s, the collapse of export commodity prices, particularly coffee and sisal, a lack of foreign direct investment, 2 successive droughts, and onset of the war with Uganda in 1978, which held the young Tanzanian nation of valuable resources. There were also internal factors that led to the implosion of the Ujaama program. The first was resistance from the public. During the 1970s, there was a resistance from the peasantry to leave their individual farms and move to communal living due to lack of personal capital that came out of the communal farms. This led President Nyerere to order forced movement to Ujaama villages. Public frustration did not help the Ujaama villages in producing acceptable agricultural yields.